week number 11 of our lockdown webinars. We have a lot of interesting things happening in the province today. It looks like phase 2 is coming to our areas, perhaps not Greater Toronto. Tim's going to have legislative update. And then Nuala is going to talk to us about summer student employment at municipalities. There are a lot of issues to consider with respect to bringing students on, keeping them safe, training them, and so on. And then Mia has quite a number of helpful tips and reminders for you this week. And so that's what our agenda is going to be. Now, I wanted to let everybody know that the training session, the Return to Work COVID safety training program that we have developed is now online. It is a 6-module program where all of your staff, counselors, and volunteers can go through the program and learn about how to keep themselves, their coworkers, and ratepayers safe on a return to work. The method is by online computer presentation. So all of your workers can work at it at their own pace. For the price, you get all 6 modules. They get to go through all of those. There's a short test at the end of each module. And at the end of the program, each person that you've trained will have a certificate so that you can prove to the Ministry of Labour that you've taken steps to educate your folks. It can be completed in less than an hour for sure. We've had a number of people go through it and it's taken them about half an hour. So there's not a large time commitment, and you can even have your workers take the program from their home computers before they actually come back to work. We're happy we've got about 14 municipalities online right now with the training. So we're seeing a lot of uptake, getting a lot of positive feedback. And so we're very interested in providing that to any and all of your municipalities. If you are interested in it, please touch base with Brittany Hodgkinson after the webinar. She'll be sending out the thank you webinar, so you'll have her contact information. And we can get your municipality online with that program as soon as possible. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Tim to talk about the legislative update for this week, the announcements from the province. I tried to convince the Premier to release the order before our webinar to make sure that we were able to tell you about what the order says, but he thought differently, and the order will be coming out probably immediately after that. So we'll probably give you a bit of an update in the email blast that Brittany sends out. But with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to tell you what we think the reopening is going to look like later today. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. It's funny to think that it's been 11 weeks. It certainly doesn't seem like it, but we're starting to see, as Paul said, there's some interesting announcements and some really interesting developments today with reopenings across the province, at least in our areas, anyways. And so I definitely want to run through what the government's announced, anyways. I know as a spoiler alert, I'm in particularly looking forward to getting a haircut at an actual establishment instead of trying to cut my own hair, which I did break down and do a few weeks ago, and so I'm looking forward to that. But Paul's right. I actually, as he was speaking, I double checked to see if the order that supports what the government has stated is published yet, and it's not currently published. So likely we'll have to update you guys via the email blast that goes that Brittany will be sending out. Hopefully we'll have the actual language from the order itself. But what I can do is in the interim is talk to you guys about what the province has posted on its website, what its sort of official stance is with respect to stage 2 reopenings, and that those are actually happening today, even though the order isn't available yet. The province has said that it's allowing these select businesses and services in certain areas to open as of today. So what I'll do for everyone is I'll do my best to run through those in a succinct fashion. Hopefully, there's quite a few businesses that are able to open, and I'll try and hit the high points for everyone. The way the province is doing the stage 2 reopenings is essentially by health unit boundaries, and so the areas that are stage 2 are and I'll just give some examples. Algoma Public region, based on region boundaries, of course. Algoma Public Health businesses within its boundaries are subject to stage 2. Brant County Health Unit, Chatham-Kent Public Health, Eastern Ontario Health Unit, Grey Bruce Health Unit, Halliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge District Health Unit. So and there's a number of other, North Bay, Parry Sound District Health Unit, for example, Northwestern Health Unit, Ottawa Public Health, Peterborough Public Health. And I won't run through all of them, but Timiskaming Health Unit and Thunder Bay District Health Unit as well are ones that I think might be relevant for some of our attendees as well. So there are quite a few health unit boundaries that are able to open. As Paul said, significantly, GTA is not part of the stage 2 reopening at this time, and some of the larger centers in southern Ontario. But the province has said basically, if you're a business or workplace that's located within one of the health unit boundaries that I mentioned, there are some others that I didn't mention as well. You can essentially reopen subject to certain criteria that I'll run through as of today. And so that's very exciting for let's say for me, because let's say one of the businesses that are able to reopen are places that do haircuts. So I'm excited about that. But I'll run through some of the main areas here that can reopen, and maybe if
Tim, I've heard that the backlog for hair salons is going to take more than a year to recover from.
That makes
sense.
I think. I know that we've got some spa clients that are reopening, that are looking to reopen as well. So we're everybody's definitely seemingly most excited about those services. But there's all sorts of businesses that are able to reopen. And I suspect that this weekend is going to be quite a busy one for establishments that can reopen. So I'm thinking, with the exception of haircutting, I'm probably not going to leave the house. But so what I'll do, guys, is I'll run through some of the key areas. Personal care services, that's as I said already, that's the main one for me. Examples of places that the government has said can open. Hair services, of course, that's the big one for me. Beauty salons, shops and parlors, beauticians, estheticians, cosmetology shops and salons, manicure and pedicure salons, hair removal services, diet centers, diet workshops, weight control clinics, weight reduction centers of a non-medical nature, piercing services, day spas, tanning salons, tattoo studios. Those can all reopen. Of course, the proviso is that they follow the proper health and safety precautions. And those are the government. I think I've mentioned before, the government has, I believe it's almost up to 90 now, the guidelines that the government has published specific to various industries, and those are the types of things that I think the government would be looking at in terms when the government states subject to ensuring proper health and safety protocols are in place. So that's just going to consider those guidelines are all online. I don't know if we sent a link to where you can find those in one of the email blasts. Maybe we can. If not, maybe we can in the one that goes out later today. The idea, of course, for personal care services and essentially it's going to be common to all businesses that I talk about, is that the expectation is that physical distancing is going to be expected to be maintained. The idea is that if you can't with a personal care service because of its nature, patrons are going to be expected to wear face masks or face coverings, and workers wear face masks or other PPE, including gloves, depending on the nature of the services they're providing. So there's going to be a limitation of the number of people who can be, for example, in a salon, and if for example chairs are too close and can't be moved, the PPE is going to have to be used by both patrons and the esthetician or hair or person doing the hair, etc. Let's go a little further. So prohibit the other thing that I should mention are things like and this may be unfortunate for some people, but services that tend to somebody's face are still prohibited, like facials, eyebrow grooming and makeup, as well as oxygen bars. I think I vaguely know what an oxygen bar is, but I've never been to one. Steam rooms, saunas, bathhouses have to remain closed. Those centers that have those floating, I have not been to one, but those float centers have to remain closed as well. That have those floating sensory deprivation pools, hot tubs as well. Change rooms and showers for the water amenities that are able to open. I'll talk about water amenities a little bit further, but will be available to the public if operators have the ability to adequately sanitize and disinfect the facilities. And that goes back actually to what Paul had said in an earlier webinar, and we'll keep going, but I just wanted to mention again, the idea is just because a business can reopen, and there's going to be some that are particularly relevant to municipalities that I'll mention as well. But just remember that just because you can reopen doesn't mean you have to reopen. And if you don't have the resources to do that proper sanitization, as Paul said before, rushing to reopen is not necessarily the best way to move forward. And actually, after I run through some more services, Paul, we talked about an interesting quote from Disney World that maybe Paul will share with everyone that I think is relevant to the issue of reopening. So some other types of services that can reopen: house sitting, party, wedding planning, personal organizer services, personal shopping services, porter services, shoe services, that being shoe shining and repair services, coat checks, etc. Wedding chapels can reopen, again subject to physical distancing. A big one for a lot of people, and I think what's going to be very busy this weekend, restaurants and bars are able to reopen, but they're only open to their dining in the outdoor areas, such as their patios, parking lots, curbside. So they're going to be allowed to reopen patios and outdoor dining areas. Again, they have to use physical distancing, using reservations, limiting the number of people that are there, encouraging enough space between tables if possible to move them. So it's going to be, I suspect, if we have nice weather, that the outdoor patios in all of our areas are going to be quite busy for sure. Malls, malls are able to reopen to a limited extent. The stores in malls have to follow the same guidelines that we've talked about. Food services and restaurants with mall only exits or entrances can open for delivery and takeout, but dining, the food courts are still no. Entertainment amenities, so movie theaters and water parks, etc., have to keep closed. And I won't talk too much about shopping malls, but the key there is I just checked the chat just to see if there are any questions coming through yet. Photography studios can reopen, film, and this may be relevant for some municipalities that have active film production activities. I know some of the municipalities in our area do a lot of film production going on, so those can resume. Again, subject to the physical distancing rules that we've talked about. Tour and guide services, so resource-based tours can reopen. Tasting tours can reopen. Trail riding, walking, and bike tours. Motor vehicle and boat tours, like sightseeing type tours, can reopen. Perhaps one of the larger ones, we talked about this in other webinars. All indoor and outdoor swimming pools and outdoor splash pads and wading pools can open to the public with no access to high contact aquatic features such as slides and climbing structures. So outdoor pools, and so we have a splash pad in Bellevue Park here in the Sioux, so see that'll be able to reopen. But any outdoor pool that has a water slide, etc., the water slide cannot reopen, so that'll have to be still off limits to people. But this also includes, for example, pools located in condos. I know my mom, who lives in a condo, will be happy to hear this, and so it also affects pools in hotels and motels and resorts. So pools there, again, subject to that same idea about the high contact features like slides, are able to reopen. Water parks are able to reopen. Wave pools, change rooms and showers, again, same as I mentioned before. As long as they can be adequately sanitized, they can be open to the public. The government has not specifically said in what adequate sanitization is. I believe there are some. So there is some information in the guidelines documents that they've put out for each industry about what proper sanitization is, but for now they've simply stated adequate sanitization. So there's some limitations on things like poolside seating, timed entry. So the idea is, try to do it by appointment only to try and maintain the social distancing. Fitness classes, like water aerobics, for example, can happen as long as they're in line with those physical distancing measures that we talked about. Outdoor recreational facilities, we talked about those in some of the previous webinars as well. Paintball, mini golf, go-kart tracks, for example, are allowed to reopen. Locker rooms, change rooms, showers, and clubhouses have to stay closed, though, except just to the extent they can provide access to a washroom or a portion of the facility used to provide first aid. So that was, we talked, I think, about that with golf courses before. So the golf course clubhouses still have to remain closed, but people can access the washroom or facilities or first aid facilities within those buildings. Recreational activities or areas that allow for 2 meter distancing, that do not allow for 2 meter distancing between patrons, are not permitted. So that's that. So even with physical distancing, the difference with outdoor rec facilities is if they can't maintain that 2 meter distancing between patrons, then they're not. Then those areas are not permitted to reopen. Amusement parks and water parks, such as the water parks attached to hotels, for example, have to remain closed. Although that seems a little bit confusing with what we just talked about. Playgrounds and so importantly as well, although it would seem splash pads, I mentioned, are able to reopen, playgrounds play structures, and outdoor fitness equipment has to stay closed. So, for example, at the park here, although it's seemingly the splash pad can reopen, the various structures that play structures, etc., that are here, those have to remain closed still. Campgrounds, there's some additional openings for those. Basically, Ontario Park campgrounds and private campgrounds can open now for recreational vehicle camping and all other types of camping. Campers have to adhere to social gathering size restrictions, and Paul, I believe, mentioned to me yesterday that the government is, although we don't have the order, the government is increasing the size of social gatherings from more than 5 to more than 10 being the restriction. So we'll try and keep you posted as the order there comes out. Beach access, beach access, I should say, at Ontario parks will be permitted as part of the gradual reopening that we're seeing here. Again, limiting capacity at some parks is going to have to happen. I'm not sure how that's going to exactly work. I have a feeling that that's going to be difficult. Outdoor recreational team sports, they can resume. Again, physical distancing, limited access to facilities, access to clubhouse limited to washrooms, just as we talked about in terms of golf courses, for example. Drive-ins and drive-throughs able to reopen. Variety of things. So drive-in theaters, if there's a drive-in theater in your municipality, it's able to reopen. Food services are restricted to delivery to 2 vehicles and drive-through only. Again, proper protocols in place to remain so people remain in cars except for using washrooms or an emergency. And so lots of interesting things there. Limiting, again, of course, trying to encourage the following of the physical distancing requirements that the government has put out. Weddings and funerals, there's some additional openings there. Events will be required to comply with limits, of course, and the government has said that that's going to be up to 10 people. I don't know if that is going to be exactly the same for social gatherings. If it's going to be the same for that when the order comes out, but certainly for weddings, the government has said it's up to 10 people. Weddings, funeral, and other services. Dine-in and bar services must be in line with the related guidelines. So that's those guidelines that the government has put out for those types of venues. Indoor and outdoor venues may open for weddings, funerals, and similar gatherings with limited access to facilities, such as what we talked about before. And guests that are not part of the same household have to follow physical distancing guidelines. So libraries are able to reopen. So that's a positive sign for a lot of us. I know that my wife is very interested in the library reopening, and so patrons are not going to be permitted to handle books though or materials on shelves, and libraries are going to have to adhere to public health guidelines, including disinfecting returns and high touch areas like computers. So there's limited, basically the concept is libraries can reopen, limited on-site services such as computer access, contactless book pickup and drop off. So that's the key. They can reopen with subject to those limitations and the adherence to public health guidelines. Community centers may be particularly relevant for some of us online today. Community centers can reopen, limited on-site programs and services, and follow workplace guidance and public health advice, of course. Recreational activities are restricted to indoor facilities. Food service are restricted to takeout, delivery, and outdoor dining spaces, just like bars and restaurants. Indoor pools at these type of facilities can open. Again, same concept with outdoor with access to locker rooms and change rooms as we've talked about before for those community centers that have indoor pools. So museums, I know we talked about museums. I talked about it in I think a couple of webinars. Museums are finally able to reopen as well. So museums, galleries, aquariums, zoos, outdoor heritage institutions, landmarks, and other historic sites, botanical gardens. I'm thinking an outdoor historic site. I'm thinking, for example, something close to home here would be potentially like Fort St. Joseph, for example. They're able to reopen. Interactive and high contact exhibits, amusement parks, water parks, and conference centers in those attractions are going to have to be closed still, though. Lockers have to be closed. The opening of those their restaurant, if they have a restaurant, bookstore, gift shop, etc., they're going to be subject to the same guidelines that we've talked about before in terms of for restaurants. Limited to outdoor dining, social distancing, etc., sanitization. Timed entry, again, is still going to be in place for those types of facilities. So managing visitor flow is going to be important. Small outdoor events. I know a number of municipalities have some great summer events, and I can think of a few off the top of my head that regularly go on. But unfortunately, right now in stage 2 is just small outdoor events. So non-essential in-person gatherings are still going to be discouraged, but small outdoor events such as cultural celebrations, animal shows, fundraisers are going to be permitted in line with gathering size restrictions that we've talked about already, subject to local health requirements. So your local health unit may have guidelines that they put out as well. And so those will have to be followed. And event organizers are going to have to put in place measures to, or should, I should say, put in measures to enable physical distancing. Large outdoor events such as concerts, large festival, parades, and amusement fairs are still not permitted. So that's, that is still unfortunate, because I know many of our municipalities have some great large parades and festivals and things that I'm looking forward to attending. But this may may still be able to go forward later in the summer, but right now stage 2 does not allow those. So it's limited to small outdoor events. Those large events like concerts, etc., are not permitted, and parades not permitted, unfortunately. So so for those places that have a community day coming up, I suspect that unfortunately, if they're anytime soon, those types of activities that we mentioned aren't going to be able to happen. So community days, festivals, and things like that may still have to be pushed off because they won't be permitted yet. And I'm just looking to see, trying to full screen my my Zoom here, but that subject to questions, and that's essentially what I wanted to say at this point about reopenings. That's all. There's, as you guys can see, there's lots of places that could reopen as of today. It's really unfortunate that we don't have the order with the exact language. This is what I explained to you guys is essentially what the government has put out in terms of their stage 2 reopening website. That's the information that they've pushed out through that. But unfortunately, we don't have the actual language of the order. But nevertheless, I know that businesses are moving forward with reopening today, in line with what we've talked about. And so, as I say, I know I'm calling for my haircut appointment imminently after our webinar. But I know Paul had, and I wanted to turn back over to Paul, because there was a really interesting quote that we talked about yesterday from Disney World of all places that I thought was really interesting, and I thought Paul might like to share that. I think it was relevant for the concept of just because the concept that just because you can reopen doesn't mean it's necessarily the best plan if you don't have those. Especially if you don't have the ability to sanitize things properly. Obviously, there's new and stricter requirements for that, and not everywhere is going to be able to adhere to those properly. So Paul, maybe
Thanks, Tim.
do you remember that quote? Maybe you could share it.
That quote actually was a quote that Nuala found in her research for
Oh,
her
that's right.
seminar.
Yes.
So I'm not going to steal her thunder.
Oh, Nuala. Yes.
But
Yeah, I
there,
forgot. My mistake. I forgot. I forgot. My apologies.
there are a couple of issues that I want to talk about that come out of what you've just told us about, Tim. So the first point that I think is going to be important is that the reopening plan is being done basically on a health unit by health unit geographic boundary basis. Yeah, for your council to be speaking to your health unit and getting advice and working with them about reopening municipal facilities, so that you're sure that council understands what the recommendations are from your health unit, and that your health unit actually may come to present at council, particularly while we can continue to do council meetings online. And that leads to the another important point, that is that the 5-person maximum limit for social gatherings and public events appears that that's going to increase to 10. And so what that means for most of us now is that if council chooses, they could start meeting in person again once the order has passed. Now, even though these limits are being increased, still social distancing has to be implemented, and we will be still permitted during the extent of the emergency to be having our council meetings online, and to be broadcasting our council meetings online so that our ratepayers can view the council meetings. And so that being said, as leaders of the community, it's very important that council, if they decide to have a meeting in person, very obviously and clearly follow the social distancing rules to ensure that when we're on TV, we're not criticized by our ratepayers that we're breaching the rules. And the other thing that's important to understand when all of these businesses are being permitted to reopen in your community is that the municipality is not required to be the enforcement agent of the province. In other words, although the province is permitting tattoo parlors to open up, it doesn't mean that you as a municipality have an obligation to police and enforce that. That's still being done by the health unit and by the police. That being said, it is definitely possible for council to task their enforcement officers, their bylaw enforcement officers, with enforcing the provincial orders. So it is within your jurisdiction to do that if council so chooses, but it is not your responsibility to police these issues. Now, that being said, of course, your ratepayer, they're going to be calling councillors, they're going to be calling staff with complaints about businesses that are not following the social distancing rules. And it would be a good idea to put this on an agenda for council to have a joint response to those complaints. And I would suggest that those complaints be forwarded to the health unit or the police. So those are some thoughts about how the reopening is going to affect your municipalities, I predict. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Nuala, who's going to talk about another very important issue, and that is the idea of employing summer students during this emergency. And Nuala will tell you about the awesome quote that Tim was teasing you about. So Nuala, over to you, please.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Again, it is our pleasure to host you this morning on our 11th webinar. It's been a really exciting period. We've really turned it into something I think worthwhile that kept us all together and sort of in touch with one another. Always puts a smile on our faces on Friday to know that everyone is healthy and able to participate in our webinar. And again, our heartfelt thanks to each of you for devoting your time, so valuable, especially now, to come to this webinar. It really means a great deal to us. I always say it, but it's worth repeating. Far and away, municipal law is our forte and our favorite, and our most favorite clients absolutely are the municipal clients, so we really appreciate you joining us. Tim, you'd know what an oxygen bar is if you ever had the unpleasant experience of drinking too much in Las Vegas, and then you would see what an oxygen bar is and how important they are. So, not knowing that, I'll leave it for a future date, but that's a big deal. The oxygen bar is not opening. Just let me tell you that, because Vegas is opening, so that needs to happen next. The quote from Disney that Paul and Tim were referencing it's very interesting, because to obviously date myself, I was involved with Y2K when I was at the city as the Y2K coordinator, and I remember one of the cornerstones that we looked to were some of the big money makers, and how seriously were they taking Y2K. And we looked at Vegas and we looked at Disney, and at that time, some of you might remember, Vegas didn't even blink for Y2K. But they were one of the first places to start shutting things down. They started shutting down buffets, and then very shortly thereafter, their hotels and casinos. Same with large amusement centers like Disney and Universal. They can't afford and will not allow themselves to lose a nickel. So when we see organizations like that shutting down completely for prolonged periods, it's serious. So Disney, I think, is a great business model, if nothing else. And what they said is, they're looking at starting to reopen, and their tagline has been, we were one of the first to close, we're going to be one of the last to reopen. That's how much we care about our guests. And I'm urging municipalities to follow suit. Don't be in a rush to reopen. If you do reopen and you get into trouble, back it up. There's no playbook for this. We're all learning. The only rule we have is safety. Safety trumps, and put safety first. So I really urge you to take your time and think carefully about reopening, and do not be afraid to circle back repeatedly to see if the precautions you put in place are working or they're not. And if they're not, back it up. The key is baby steps, really, going forward. And you can let your municipality know that you're not doing this out of lethargy, and you're not doing it because your staff is apathetic. You're doing it for the exact same reason Disney is doing it, because you don't want people to get sick, and because you are concerned about your community and your guests, your staff, and your counselors. So with that, I'm going to speak about a special group of people that municipalities generally hire, which are summer students. And if you've been noticing in the news, of course, everybody's employment and wages are significant, not everybody's, but the vast majority of people in the world, and certainly in Ontario, have been impacted by COVID-19. One of the hardest hit little pockets are students. They're an easy, I remember when I was working for the city, and for those of you that are city staff, you'll know when you're looking at budgeting, it certainly was in the Sioux, was one of the first things that we looked at cutting. What if we don't hire summer students? So they're vulnerable, they're an easy target. And if they're unable to work, they miss out on mentoring that municipal staff can provide. And they miss out on very valuable things like just having references to get into graduate school or to find jobs thereafter. It's a really important service that we provide. And I like to remind municipalities, we're social. We're not for profit. We're not IBM. This is not what we're doing. We're supposed to be serving the community. And part of that is youth, absolutely. It also is a great investment in your future, because if kids leave and go to university and they had a great experience working for you for the summer, they're going to want to come back to your community. So they should not be, in my view, dismissed pretty readily. So I'm urging municipalities to look at students the same way we looked at our full-time regular staff, creatively and with compassion. So if there's a way that you can have students working this summer, it would really bode well for you, even if that means you're doing it rather creatively. Now, you're not going to be able to virtually mow the lawn, although according to my son, yes, he can. So the parks that need mowing and the cemeteries that need mowing, I mean, that has to be done in person. So if you're doing that, it's very important that, first of all, you train the summer students the same way you're training your staff. shameless plug for our training package, but we put an awful lot of time into it to make it compact, easy to use, and people can get through it. We're very cognizant of people's time. It really, you'll be done in an hour. It won't be an hour and a half. It might be a half an hour, it might be 40 minutes, but it will not be an hour. As Paul said, you can have staff and students complete the training at home before they even come to the site. But if it's not our training, whatever training, the students should be privy to it and should not just be encouraged to do it, it should be mandatory. The training needs to be mandatory, particularly with PPE. There's a couple of silly memes floating around. I'm very tempted to present it to this group, but Paul told me I could, and I wouldn't be on this seminar anymore. There are a couple of funny memes going around with PPE about improper, how to wear it improperly. And that's the same as not wearing it. It's worse in some cases. So they need to have the PPE. They need to be instructed in how to wear it. And most importantly, you need to provide it. That way, it's going to be consistent across the board. People aren't bringing masks from home or gloves that are, not proper for the purpose. Have a lot of disposable gloves and masks. And then the flip side of it, of course, is there's got to be some enforcement piece. And for employers, that comes in the form of discipline. So if the PPE is not being worn or not being worn properly after it's been provided, after training has been provided, then that warrants discipline. That shows everyone. It shows your community and it shows the ministry. You take it seriously. And I know we do take it seriously. So that is a reflection of how seriously you take the precautions. If you are unable to hire students, if the finances just aren't there this summer, and that may well be the case for a lot of people, there are special programs available for students. There's a special student CERB available. And I was reading, there's also a special volunteer CERB available. So if you put in a certain number of volunteer hours, the government is going to provide a subsidy for that. An actual grant, I guess I should say, is what is more like it to help students. So those programs are available largely through CRA. And if you want information on it, we can provide it. But I don't think it would be a bad idea to have those programs available on your website or have the applications available, at least have your staff versed in it. So when students are calling and saying, do you think I'll be able to mow lawns this summer, or are you able to, you can say no, but you should avail yourself of some of these other programs. Two other little areas that I just want to touch on. One is volunteers. I don't know why we mark a distinction between regular staff and volunteers. The only difference is they don't get paid. They are as much an advantage and a liability to a municipality as any employee. It's critical that they also get the training, that they be trained before they come on site. The same thing with personal protective equipment and so forth, and treat your employees exactly as you do the volunteers, and the volunteers exactly as you do your employees. And then just a word on board members. Board members are a type of volunteer, really, because generally they get a small honorarium or nothing. And they vary in walks of life and age and so forth. And some of them might be reluctant to say wear a mask or to take the training. Strongly recommend that you make available to all your volunteer board members on arts committees, on recreation committees, on museum committees, this training or a like training, so that they are aware of how serious this is. Also provide PPE and training on the PPE. What if you get someone who says, I'm not going to wear that mask, it causes my eczema to break out or something in my face, I'm not going to wear it? Well, then my recommendation is have them participate remotely. Or you can say, that's fine, you don't need to wear the PPE if it's not suitable for you, but you cannot come on our site without it. So you need that level of seriousness. My approach to all sorts of new developments is, it's better to have buy-in. It's better if people understand the problem and they want to do it, rather than you enforcing them to do it. So communication is the absolute key. So whenever you're, I don't know what your practice is at most of your council meetings. I presume you're doing this, but if you're not, it's great to give the community an update about reopening, what your reopening looks like, what they can expect in the coming days, and they can start to prepare for it, and that they know how seriously you're taking the spread. And it's very exciting. People, there's a level of optimism because so many things are reopening with patios and gatherings. I hope this isn't the case, but I think it's in the back of all of our minds that there might be another spike or surge, and we're going to have to go back to square one. Try not to make your community the first one that does that. Try and make your community the one that said, despite what's going on in Ontario, it didn't happen in our municipality because we took it so carefully. So follow the words of Walt Disney, be one of the first to close, one of the last to open, with a view to safety and the health of your community, which I know you have anyways, but sometimes we lose sight of it when we're so excited about getting back to the way the world used to be. So those are my comments on some special workers that we have, and my blatant love of Walt Disney.
Thank you very much for that, Nuala. I think that it is to build on some of the things that Nuala has talked about. Labor and employment law is certainly one of the focuses of my practice, particularly for municipalities. And you've probably heard me say it on some of the previous webinars, but one of my mantras is, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And so when you're looking at training your students, it's critical that your training program be documented, that there be signed training sheets so that there is proof that the students have received the training. But in addition to training your students, I think it's really important that you train the supervisors that are dealing with your students as well with respect to these issues. The enforcement, and that's not a great word, but it's probably the clearest, the enforcement of your rules with respect to PPE, with respect to safety, is as critical as having the rules in place. In other words, having a safety program and a safety training that you do on the first day of the students coming to the office or the day before they come to the office isn't enough if those rules are not enforced. And having been a student in the past, a long time ago, I know that those rules are sometimes seen as a formality as opposed to something that they really need to deal with. So your supervisors need to be encouraged, required, frankly, to enforce the safety rules with students, with volunteers, with ratepayers. In other words, if you have ratepayers that insist on getting too close to the students, then you have to protect the students by requiring the ratepayers not to do that. So it is critically important right now, where we have an unseen enemy with the virus, and we're starting in today a community spread case. It's our first case in about 3 weeks, and what that tells us is that the virus is in our community. We do have people who are asymptomatic or who haven't gone to be tested or haven't gone to the hospital. So although we can't see it, and it's exciting that reopening is happening, the threat's still out there. And as employers, we have an obligation to protect our workers, not just our students, but our workers, by having these programs in place and by ensuring that they're enforced. And that's why with our training program, we wanted to make sure that you wind up with a certificate that you can put in the file to prove, if God forbid somebody does get sick, that you did this training and that you are taking steps to protect your workers. So I'm going to turn this over now to Mia to give us her helpful tricks and reminders. And we're happy to take questions that you have as well using the chat. Over to you, Mia.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. So this morning, I am kind of going to talk about a mishmash of different things, you know, as we're gearing towards the reopening and everything. And first, I'm going to kind of start off with short-term rentals and, you know, different municipalities, well, I guess different regions being able to open and what that can kind of look like for different municipalities. So as we know, short-term rentals are allowed to operate once again during this pandemic, and that includes lodges, cabins, cottages, homes, and condominiums. So as different regions start to reopen and restaurant patios are going to open and so on, you know, we may start to see more travel in between different regions and municipalities and so on. So, you know, in a way we look at that and we're saying, okay, well, this is great because we're going to head towards economic recovery and, you know, people are going to be out again. But then we also have to kind of look back and say, well, you know, we've been doing really well as a region. And just because we're opening, now we're going to have other people from areas that aren't open coming into ours. So this is something to kind of be mindful of the activity within your community, and just make sure that, you know, social distancing and the masks and the hand sanitizer and all that is still readily available. It's something to be mindful of, you know, with restaurant patios. Are people from different areas going to be coming in now to our restaurant patios and so on? So something to always keep on our radar there. Also with alcohol licensing and so on, you know, with patios, because as we know, restaurants are only open for patio service and of course takeout and so on. So we're going to see that expansion to the expansion of patios and food trucks, and, you know, where are those going to be able to park, and if we're going to allow alcohol in different areas. In our municipality, you know, we have to make sure that there's like the appropriate ways to dispose of the alcohol. If, you know, there's some places that we're allowing it in parks and so on. So we want to make sure that we deal with the waste appropriately and so on. So there's a lot of different realities that are coming forward now. They're really coming to light now for leaders in the municipality and so on. So as we transition from phase 1 into phase 2, you know, we start to think of receiving payments from suppliers now that things are opening up again, taking payments from ratepayers. A lot of people still have the habit of going into a place to make a payment. So, you know, coming into the municipality to make a payment. Right now, you know, this isn't really possible. Doing check runs every week now, you know, with that's not much of a reality anymore. We're looking more towards e-transfer, mailing checks, you know, in the mail and so on, instead of physically dropping them off. We're seeing a delay in postal service. And the question is now, even once things reopen and we're looking a few months down the road, how is this going to change people coming into the municipal office and using our services? Are people still going to want to use e-transfer and so on? So we're going to have to look at kind of reinventing service delivery models and what those may look like moving forward, because we've kind of all adjusted in the last 3 months. And is this just going to be the new way moving forward for the months to come, for years to come? Are we going to permanently move to a different way of delivering services? So there's kind of been a lot of talk about that as well. So where do we go from here, and how can we sustain all of this in the long term? When do we go back to shaking hands with people? Will we ever go back to shaking hands with people? These are all things that, you know, we have thoughts that we have, and we're wondering, you know, are we ever going to be able to have a meeting in the same room? What's that going to look like moving forward? Because we don't have this right now. A lot of it is by teleconference, Zoom, and so on. So we can absolutely function, but it may be still a struggle for, you know, if there's difficulties with technology and so on. So we've done a lot in the past few months to recognize that we absolutely can do this. We are able to function remotely and electronically, but to what extent does this become the new normal? So, you know, service expectations that we have to support going forward that we haven't had to in the past. That's also something to think about. And within our workplaces, within our organizations, we have always different groups. So we have, you know, we have people going full force every day, you know, keeping the lights on. We have our core services that are continuing. We have garbage collection, maintaining municipal facilities, trying to still deliver some programs. And then on another end of the spectrum, you have, you know, people that are just doing the best that they can with what they have right now. And then we still have the struggle with technology. So there's lots of different levels of burnout. There's lots of different levels of anxiety, lots of different levels of frustration. And then there's others that are just handling it really well. So everyone needs support and assistance to come to terms with how far we've actually come right now in this crisis and adapting to it, and now to start the transition to the new normal. So this is going to be a big transition, but it can be done, and there's lots of support for us out there. So you know, when we prepare for re-entering and what that new identity is going to be for us, we're going to look at very different work environments, different work modes. You know, work times may be different for each employee to manage physical distancing. But we have to also think too, how can we help to not just physically prepare technology-wise, but how can we emotionally prepare to move into this new identity as a whole? So some things that we can think about, and I know that every week I've kind of hammered forward, you know, communication, how to properly communicate, and some tips, you know, getting good information out to everyone. So what can we build into our communication and guidance now to our communities to kind of put forward this new identity that we're going to have in phase 2 and moving forward. So what can we plan and put in place, you know, that's safe and accommodates the physical distancing needs that are required to stop the spread of COVID. So this is a good time right now to reconnect with neighboring communities and partners within your community about how we can all collectively move forward together. And like I said before, support and communication is key right now. So that's all I have today for my helpful tips and reminders, and I can turn it back to Paul.
So we've had a lot of questions about the Planning Act, about dealing with staff when we reopen the office. Actually, what I want to do is I'm going to share the polling results with you. So we do see a real mix of bringing staff back to work. The bulk of municipalities are going to be bringing them back gradually. And there's a significant portion that have not made that plan yet, which tells me that that they're not yet thinking about bringing staff back to work. Then there's the question about dealing with a second wave. Nuala touched on this a little bit in her presentation, and she said we need to be ready that if there is a spike, or if we take a step and we see it causing an outbreak, or if there's an outbreak caused by other things, that we need to be ready to roll back into our protective shell. I think that's definitely something that council should be thinking about and talking about in their policy leadership role. So I think that should be on agendas very shortly. For just getting ideas on the table about how we're going to deal with that. Then I'm interested in the answer to the third question about, have you updated your emergency response plan in light of the pandemic? 50% of you have said yes. That's great. I'm really excited to hear that. The other half have not. I definitely think, again, this is a policy that staff should be providing advice to council. And council should be looking at this so that we can ensure that our emergency response plan is going to deal with either another wave in this pandemic or the next pandemic, because certainly now that it's happened, it is foreseeable, and organizations are going to be expected to be able to deal with those results. So we're going to talk next week about some ideas that we have about reopening, about how you can do that, particularly the idea of the uncontrolled access to the municipal office when you reopen the office. So we definitely have some ideas about that. We're going to see the province, I think today in the order, make a lot of requirements for record keeping and screening. And so we'll talk some more about that next week. So I see that we are 1 minute over time. I think that's a new record for us. I really do appreciate all of you coming. I really appreciate your just want to highlight again the training that we've got in place. It is live, it's online, and it's ready to go. The intention of us as we were developing it would be that it's for counselors, it's for staff, it's also for volunteers. It's a good way to protect you. And again, it goes with our theory that what we want to try to do is give you tools to succeed rather than give you things that you have to do. So Brittany's going to let you know in the email how your municipality can join. I guess we've got 16 municipalities now participating so far. So we're really happy with that uptake, and we thank you all for your time. So we'll see you again next week for number 12. Thanks very much for your attendance, and we will see you all next week. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Stay safe.